Okay, welcome everybody. Welcome to our webinar today. It's lovely to see you all here. Thank you very much for giving up your valuable time and spending it with me. My name is Lindsay Warwick and I'm a teacher and trainer based here in the UK near Cambridge, and I'm also a Pearson author, which is why they've invited me here to give this webinar. So just some sort of housekeeping before we start, and it'll give people a chance to arrive as well. In a moment, I'm going to click on a record button and I'm going to record this session just to let you know, and that will obviously include the chat as well. Within the next couple of days, you will receive an email from Pearson and it will include a link to the recording if you want it, if there's something you missed that you want to go back and have a look at. And we will also provide a certificate of attendance for you, so you'll receive that in the email as well, or at least it provides a link to your personalised certificate. So get ready for that. Questions, save up your questions. Oh, you can ask during the session and I might see them, but I'm not very good at multitasking, so I might miss them. So at the end we will have time for questions, so you can also save them up then and type them in the chat box at the end and I'll be able to answer them. So hello from Mexico, Olaf, nice to see you here. So we've got lots of people all over. We've got people from Austria, Lithuania. It's always wonderful to, you know, this is the positive of technology, isn't it? Being able to communicate with people from all over the world at the same time. It's amazing. Lovely. So, 4 a.m. Oh gosh, you're keen. Well, I hope it's going to be useful for you. Right, I'm going to click on the record button right now. Oh no, I think Anya's already done it. So that's good. So we're recording. Okay, let's start. So this is the first then in a series of webinars that we're doing on the topic of exam preparation. And the idea is to help teachers around the world to better prepare their learners for exams, and we're focusing really on the Cambridge exams in this session. This particular focus today is on understanding your exam. So what we're going to have a look at are the following things, because obviously if we understand the exams well, then we can help our students to understand what it is they're being tested on, what the tasks are and how they can actually do the tasks well, as well as developing the skills, more importantly, that they need to pass the exam and that they can use beyond the classroom as well. So it's really important that we know so that we can help our students better. So what we're going to do today is we're going to look at common tasks across the Cambridge exams, and we're going to think about, you know, the principles behind them. What are they testing, as well as what learners can do to actually, you know, what sort of strategies they can use. So I'll touch on those. And common problems that students have with some of the tasks, we'll look at that. We can't look at all of them, there just isn't enough time. We'll look at a few strategies that can help students overcome problems, or some a few classroom activities we might be able to do to help learners with those particular aspects. And then we'll look at the end at the changes to the Cambridge Key and Key for Schools exam, and changes to the Cambridge Preliminary and Cambridge Preliminary for Schools exam, because they're changing in 2020, and we obviously want you to be aware of what those changes are so that you can help your students to prepare for those exams next year. This isn't some of the sessions that come after this are going to be much more practical in nature. So we're really looking at understanding the exam and kind of the principles behind it. I'm going to give you a few ideas for the classroom, but it's not full of lots of classroom ideas, but they will come, I promise you, in future webinars. So this is really laying the foundation so that we understand the exams better. So let's think firstly about the key principles of testing language, because these are the principles that the Cambridge exams are actually based on. The first thing is that the test has to have validity, and that means that the test has to measure what it aims to measure. So for example, the test content needs to be appropriate for the test taker's age, their level, their interests, and so on. So obviously level is taken care of because we have A2, B1 and so on. So we have different levels of exams, but we've also got at A2, B1 and B2 level, we have key, preliminary and first, and then we have key, preliminary and first for schools. And of course, the idea there is that when you've got 14 or 15-year-olds taking the Cambridge exam, if they're taking the same exam as the adults, and the material isn't really appropriate for their age, so that's not really very valid. So that's why there are two separate tests for different ages of learners. Test creators also need to make sure that the test tasks are appropriate. This means that they test exactly what they are intended to test. So reading aloud, for example, tests your understanding of being able to decode a word and pronounce it, but it doesn't test comprehension. Test makers also need to make sure that there are a range of tasks in an exam, because each test task has obviously benefits and there are some limitations. Multiple choice, for example, one limitation is it's not very authentic. Another limitation is that I guess you could guess, so you have a 33% chance at least if you have 3 options of guessing and getting it correct. So rather than have multiple choice across the whole, or the whole exam, listening and reading, you've got a variety of tasks so that we can benefit from the multiple choice, but also reduce its limitations and make sure that we have other tasks that I guess help to avoid the issues that we have with multiple choice, for example. So that's validity, and we also need to make sure, obviously, that the test makers need to make sure that the test is reliable. So can the students get the same mark if they take the test today and then next week and produce the same language? Well, it should obviously produce the same score. And that's easy in reading and listening because the answers are correct or not correct. But in writing and speaking, it's more difficult. So obviously, there are very clear scoring criteria, which we'll look at a bit later. And these criteria are designed to make sure that examiners can examine as objectively as possible. Obviously, we're human, so it can be tricky to get us all to think the same, but there is extensive training and also regular standardization and checks and things like that, so that the system is quite rigorous to make sure that the scoring is reliable, and also that the test conditions are reliable as well, to help ensure that scoring overall is reliable. All right, let's think about the purpose of the Cambridge exams then, because this obviously determines what the content of the exams are. So at A2, we can see that we're testing students' ability to communicate in English in simple situations. So the test materials and the tasks are going to be geared towards doing that to make sure it's valid. At B1, they're being tested in their ability to communicate in everyday situations. And at B2, it's communicating in everyday English-speaking situations. At C1, now it's testing our ability to communicate effectively in professional and academic contexts. And at C2, it's communicating fluently in high-level managerial and high-level academic contexts. So that very much determines, as I say, the material and the task types. And of course, in terms of level, the test needs to make sure that it's testing at the appropriate level. So at A2 and B1, well, really, we're expecting learners to be able to communicate with, be able to understand and produce concrete ideas using low-level vocabulary and grammar, in simple sentences, and with slow speech. But at the higher level, C2, very high level, we've got abstract ideas, high-level vocabulary and grammar, producing complex and understanding complex sentences in fast speech and producing fast speech as well. So we've got the line here, and of course the exams go up across this as they go up in level. So let's think then about about testing reading. So we have the reading and use of English paper at A2 key level. This also includes writing. Now, let's think first about reading skills. So I'm going to throw over to you. What do we do when we read? What goes on in our brains? What is the processing when we read? Can you type your ideas in the chat box, please? What do you think? What do we do when we read? Amia, I can provide access to the slides. I think that's fine. We can turn them into a PDF for you. We decode, Galina, we do. We try to understand the main ideas. We imagine a situation. We do, well, we predict, don't we? We sort of predict our understanding of context. We use that to understand what we read, yeah. Ah, yeah, we do. Sorry, we imagine what we see in our minds. You're right. If we're reading a story, we picture it in our minds. Yes, yes. Interpret characters, then form a tree. Okay. Relax, imagine. I like that, Natalia. Depends what you're reading, I think. We understand the global idea, we connect ideas, we scan and skim. Okay. Yeah, these are all things that we might do. Okay, keep adding, keep adding. I'll move on to the next slide. So here are some of the things that we do when we read. Somebody mentioned decoding, and this is what we would refer to as bottom-up skills or micro skills. So this idea that we have to decode letters, and then we put the letters together to decode a word, and we also obviously decode chunks of language, so phrases, and then we work out the meaning of those, and then we have to understand information across a sentence, so we're also working out the grammar as well, and then we're understanding information across a paragraph and across the whole text, and then across several texts, especially if you're in an academic context or in business, you might be reading several reports or several different sources of academic information. So we'll be doing that. We'll be doing things like making inferences and also using our background knowledge and understanding of the world to kind of predict what we're going to read and help us to understand what we read as well. And we're connecting what we know with what we're learning in the text. So there are lots and lots and lots of things we're doing when we are reading. And these are the kinds of things that are being tested in the exam. So if we think first about the actual text that learners read, at the lower levels, they're going to be obviously fairly simple texts. They are designed to, well, they're usually descriptive in nature and they're usually concrete, so the information is fairly concrete. And they're designed to be familiar to the reader. But at higher levels, the texts are going to be on topics which are less familiar, more abstract, less concrete, and obviously the complexity of the language is going to be much higher. So if we think about the task types, then we've got multiple choice, as I mentioned earlier. And at A2 and B1, we've got this particular multiple choice task where students see a sign or a notice of some kind, and then they have to understand the main message, and they have to choose from 3 options which is correct. So here, for example, it says that children are free, so B is the correct answer. Children can enter without paying. Now here you can see that learners are not reading an awful lot. It's everyday information, it's concrete information, and it's learners are reading across a sentence. They're not really learning beyond that. So that we can see that it's being tested at quite a low level here. Also got at the lower levels, in fact, at all the levels, there's also multiple choice across a long text. So learners read a long text and then answer several multiple choice questions. Now here, if we say A2 and B1 level, there are 3 options, and the information is really factual, and the options that they choose from are not too long, so learners are not having to read an awful lot. But here we can see first, so this is B2 level, and you can see here that there are 4 options. The options are much longer, so learners are having to read and read those at length before they read the text, so that makes it more challenging. And at the lower levels, they're tested on being able to find specific information and understand detailed information. And at higher levels, so first and beyond, they are tested on those same 2 things, but they're also tested on their understanding of a writer's attitude. You can see in the question here about writer's attitude, writer's opinion, tone, and also implication as well. So, you know, a lot of reading between the lines, because it is more that people tend to infer and not necessarily state specifically, so that does make it more difficult. So the strategy that we use across the levels tends to be the same. So we get learners to read the question or the stem, and they underline the key words so that they focus on what they're looking for in the text. They would use those, or at least use one or two of those, to scan the text quickly, find the location, and read that passage in more detail. And they then understand the passage and read the options and match the one which is correct. So that's the strategy that we would suggest, but obviously multiple choice, not, it's easy in the sense that you can guess, but not so easy in getting the right answer. So over to you. What, in your experience, are the key challenges with multiple choice questions? Can you type your ideas in the chat box, please? Yep, so lots of mention of distractors, knowing synonyms. Absolutely, yeah. Let's talk about distractors later when we talk about listening, if that's okay. I'm going to talk a little bit about paraphrasing, clear understanding of the main message. Yeah, so that obviously, I mean, a lot of reading comes down to vocabulary, doesn't it? Vocabulary and grammar. If learners don't have the vocabulary and grammar, then they can't understand the overall message. So, so much work on that is useful, particularly vocabulary, I think. Okay, oh, let me go back. Sorry, I think I jumped actually. There we go. So key challenge, I think, is paraphrase. So what we can do, obviously, because if I go back to my multiple choice options here, if we see A, she's impressed by their behaviour, we're not going to see in the text, I was impressed by their behaviour. It's just not going to happen. It's going to be paraphrased, and it might even be implied more than stated, although at first that's probably going to be more stated. So learners need to identify paraphrases of that. So what we can do is we can get students predicting synonyms and paraphrases, because I think it's a lot about activating and getting them just really thinking about the wide variety of structures that we can use and wide variety of language that we can use in general to describe different things. So when we're getting them to prepare for the exam, we can get them to underline the keywords, use the keywords to scan and find the location of the text. And then when they read it in detail, we can get them to actually then paraphrase before they read the options. What do you think it might say in the options, and get them actually coming up with some paraphrasing, because then that just gets them predicting. But as I say, it just activates their understanding and knowledge of language for paraphrasing in general. And then not really with an exam task, just in general in class, we can just take sentences and get students to paraphrase it. When we have a few minutes at the beginning of a lesson, we can do a quick review of vocabulary. We learnt some new vocabulary last week. I'm going to give you a sentence. Can you paraphrase it using one of the new words we learnt last week? So it just gets them, as I say, activating a different knowledge of synonyms and ways that we paraphrase language. And also, when we've done a reading text in class, why not get students to summarise it in their own words? It shows understanding. It's a useful skill. We might do it outside of the classroom. I think it fits into the mediation territory of the new CEFR, if any of you are familiar with that. But also, you could get, for example, A, so in pairs, student A summarises the text in their own words, and then B has to summarise it again using different words. Next time they can swap over, so something like that. So getting students to work with paraphrase is very important, as some of you mentioned, and we'll talk about distractors a bit later. Okay, moving on then. Another exam task for reading is multiple matching. So here, students read a text with information about a certain number of people in it, and then they have to identify which person did or said something. So here at A2 level, they have information about 3 people, and then they have to say, for example, which person watched a film outside. And of course, the important thing here is that learners need to underline all of the parts of the question that they're looking for and match all parts. So which person watched a film outside, because someone else might have watched a film but not outside. So if they choose that person, it's not going to be correct. So matching all of that. And of course, at higher levels, the task becomes much more difficult and much more abstract and more about something that is implied rather than stated. At C1 level, we've got the fairly new cross-matching task, which is a real challenge. And the idea here is that there's a text with 4 different opinions about a topic. So 4 different commenters. Here the topic is the value of giving homework. And the learners have to, for example, question 1, which commenter expresses the same view as commenter B regarding the type of homework that could be useful? And here, of course, they're having to first find, so underlining the keywords, what are they looking for? They're looking for commenter B, so text B. They're looking for type of homework that could be useful. So they have to identify where the commenter says that. They have to identify their opinion about it. And then they have to read A, C, and D and find if the commenters there have talked about the same topic, and if they have, they then identify what the opinion is of that commenter and find the one which is the same as commenter B. So there's quite a lot going on there. And what is it testing? It's testing the ability for a reader to compare and contrast opinions across text, because as I said earlier, one of the things that we do is we read across text. We hold information in our minds, we can compare and contrast. So that's why that text has been introduced at higher level. We also have the gap text. Now this is new at B1 level. So I'm going to tell you later on about the changes, but this is one change. So at B1 and B2, there's a text with some gaps, and within each gap there's a sentence missing. Learners have the sentences given to them and 3 that are not used, and they have to fill the gaps with the sentences that are missing. And at higher levels, it's paragraph, C1 and C2, it's a paragraph that's missing. And here, this is testing learners' understanding of text construction. So when we choose the sentence or the paragraph, it has to fit in terms of meaning, but also grammatically speaking as well. So, for example, if I've got it in my if I've got an it in my missing in my sentence, the gap, then I have to make sure that it refers to something either before or after the gap. It has to make sense. If it doesn't refer to anything, even though the sentence seems to fit meaning-wise, because the vocabulary seems similar, it might not fit exactly. So helping learners to understand referencing, so it, them, that, and so on, and what they refer to in the text. Helping them to understand how discourse markers help to shape discourse in a text, and linkers and how they connect ideas, and also lexical cohesion as well, understanding how we use vocabulary in a text to make it cohesive as well. So that is one thing that we can do to help our students with that task. Then we have use of English. So yes, Hasmik, I've got your question here. So can you give some tips to work with keywords once identified? Yes, okay. I'll answer that now, I think. So I think learners first need to look at the keywords and identify the one in the question that is going to help them to search and find the information. So if there's no point choosing a common word that's going to appear in the text more often, they need to choose something that is something that doesn't appear commonly in the text that they can look for quickly. It might be that they can look for the word, but often it's paraphrased. It just depends. It's not always that way. So they might need to think of a synonym or something that they need to look, or something in a different way. And then they can find in the text, they can find the place, they can search for those words, the keywords or the paraphrase, and try and find it quickly. One thing that I do is to get my students to skim, and by skim, what I mean is that they read the first line of every paragraph, because that often tells you the main point of that paragraph, and then they can sometimes use that information to understand what it's about, and then they can sometimes use that information to search, because they can say, oh, it's probably in that paragraph or around here. It doesn't always work, but it is often very useful. So identifying the word that they can use to search, thinking of other ways it would be explained, and then searching for that quickly, which can be difficult because obviously learners need the vocabulary to be able to look for paraphrasing. Okay, within the reading paper, we've also got use of English, and we've got 4 key tasks here. So we've got multiple choice close or multiple choice gap fill, and here there are gaps in a short text, and students have to choose the correct option. So this is A2, there are 3 options, but as we go up, we get 4 options. And they're being tested at the lower level on understanding the precision of meaning, so being able to identify words which have the correct meaning for the sentence, and also collocation. And at the higher levels, they're also being tested on idioms, phrasal verbs, fixed expressions, complementation. So it's really important that when we're teaching vocabulary, we're not just teaching words in isolation, we're also teaching chunks of words. So what phrases does this word go in? What dependent preposition does it go with? What verbs does it collocate with? So teaching chunks of language, and that means getting students to notice them in reading texts and audio scripts, underlining useful chunks and phrases that they might come across and that they like to use themselves. I often say to my learners, which would you like to use in your writing and your speaking? Getting them to sort of look with a clear purpose. So getting them to note these down, reviewing chunks of language and not just isolated words. So lots and lots of review activities where I have a vocabulary box where students, these phrases go on a piece of paper in my vocabulary box, and then I just pull out some words and give some to each group of students, and they do something like they take a word or phrase and describe it, and their partners have to guess, very simple, or they draw it and their partners guess something like that. Also drilling chunks of language, I think, is so important. So not just teaching, not just drilling an isolated word, but getting students to repeat the whole phrase so they can hear how it sounds in the listening. When they're listening to fast speech, how does it sound when it's linked together as a phrase and not just as an isolated word? I think that's really important. So that's the multiple choice gap fill or multiple choice close. And as I say, mostly it's vocabulary. You might get 1 or 2 grammar questions, but it's usually vocabulary here. And then we have the open close, where there are no multiple choice options. There's just gaps and you have to write the missing word. And this is more focused on grammar. And it's things like relative pronouns, articles, prepositions, auxiliary verbs. And obviously it gets more complex as you go up, so focusing on that kind of grammar is very useful. We can work with that. Then we've got word formation. So here you've got a text with some missing words. You are actually given the word, but the word doesn't fit as it stands. You have to manipulate that particular word by adding a prefix and or a suffix. So you're changing the meaning of the word and possibly the word class as well. So you can see with the example here, you're given the word emphasize, but actually in the text, it should be overemphasized. So you're not changing the word form with a suffix, but you are adding a prefix to fit the meaning. And here, you're really having to understand the meaning of the whole text. You're reading across the text because you have to understand how the idea of the writer within it, to be able to understand whether he's talking about something being too much. Well, we need to know that he's saying that it's negative or that it's positive, because that will help us very much. So following ideas are really important. And this is where we, again, not just teaching words in isolation or even only just in phrases or collocations, we should also teach word families. So if we're teaching the word emphasize, we should also teach emphasis and overemphasize as well. Apprehend, apprehensive, and so on. So getting learners to be able to manipulate language at B2 and above is really important. So this isn't in A2 or B1, it's just B2 and above. And then we've got the keyword transformations, which are no longer in B1. If you teach preliminary from 2020, they will no longer be in the B1 exam. Here you have 2 sentences that have the same meaning, but in the second sentence, some words are missing and you have to replace them using the word in bold. So I missed my class because I set off late. So I think it is, oh no, I've got to think about this carefully now. If only I hadn't, if only I'd set off on time, I wouldn't have missed my class. So you're having to make the sentence have the same meaning, and you're having to use the expression there as well. So you need to know the expression on time, but you also need to know the third conditional here. So conditionals, passives, phrasal verbs, lexical chunks, all of, fixed expressions, these are all extremely useful for this part of the exam. So that's reading and use of English. And let's move on and think about listening. So I asked you about reading. What do we do when we listen? What goes on in our minds when we're listening? Can you type your ideas in the chat box, please? So I just drink some water. Glad you like Gold Experience, Monica. Gabriella says decode. I think you said decode for reading, Gabriella, and you're right. We absolutely decode for both. We do. We predict. We predict, and we don't only just predict what we do before we listen. We also predict as we listen, don't we? Because we can often predict what someone's going to say at the end of their sentence because of our knowledge of collocation and so on. We identify sounds, words, intonation, stresses. Yeah, absolutely. And identifying sounds and, well, words is particularly difficult. Lots of concentration. Yeah, but yes, you're right. And particularly in a 30-minute exam as well, when you're having to listen and really focus. Yeah, yeah. Try to fill gaps of information for what we understand. Yes, so we use our knowledge of context and prediction to fill the gaps because we don't always hear every word. We might listen for specific information. Yes, absolutely. Yeah, we're listening with a particular focus. Yeah, intonation is important. Yeah, they listen for the first 20 seconds and then they get lost. Yeah, okay. And they get lost because of the process, really, that can be difficult. I mean, John Field, in his book Listening in the Language Classroom, talks about 5 stages, and he's a researcher. This is from extensive research. So when we listen, the first thing we do is decode. So we identify sounds and identify words that we hear, and obviously that can be very difficult because in fast speech we link and we have weak forms and we have stress words. So decoding involves being able to, use stress to understand and hear the words, being able to identify where a word begins and ends. And learners have real problems with this. So the first stage is decoding, and typically we haven't done a lot of work on decoding in the language classroom in terms of methodology, but it is becoming more fashionable again to really focus on this. Once we have identified a word, we then do a lexical search and we pull out a word that sounds the same and we match it and hope that it has the meaning of the word that we've heard and we have heard correctly. And that's a lexical search. And then we have parsing. Then we need to make sense of the word within the sentence. So we need to understand the grammar around the word. Then we have meaning construction. So now we're actually trying to understand the meaning of that word and the words in the sentence. And then discourse construction. We're using that phonological loop to hold what we've just heard in our memories, short-term memories, while we hear the next thing and sort of piece it together. So we're constantly piecing it together. And obviously these are very difficult processes. And this is what learners in the Cambridge exams are being tested at different levels. So if we have a look here, the learners are really being tested on decoding and lexical search. So it's multiple choice. So this is A2 and B1, where they have the options, is short extracts. So they hear short conversations or monologue, and they identify A, B, or C, and it's the pictures. So what time is it? Or who is what woman is Jack's technology teacher? Which woman is Jack's technology teacher? So again, it's trying to take away the cognitive challenge by having lots of written text there for them to look at. The visual elements is supposed to help them, so they can just focus on decoding and lexical search. Now, of course, there's multiple choice short extracts across all of the. So here at Here at A2 and B1, they listen with the visual options, but then there are also the short extract with written options across all the exams. So again, at A2 and B1, they also have this, and this is new in those exams. So here they listen to 5 or 6 short extracts. So each extract, each conversation has one question set on it, set about it. At lower levels, 3 options, higher levels, 4 options. And we can see here that it's very concrete. The information is concrete. It's everyday factual information, you know, topics that learners are familiar with. So what does the girl say about the university? It was close to home, etc. But then when we get to the higher level, we've got short extracts at the higher level. It becomes more about identifying attitude, agreement, identifying functions such as, you know, is someone complaining, is somebody frustrated, and so on. And then we have the longer text multiple choice option as well. So again, across all of the exam levels, and this is where they listen to a longer conversation and answer a number of multiple choice questions. And again, at lower levels it's 3 options, at higher levels it's 4 options, and here it's more about understanding, you know, opinions, attitude, tone, implication again, so much more complex at the higher levels. I've also got sentence completion. So at A2 level, it's just filling in a form basically with words, very simple, names of places, names of people, which are generally spelt. So spelling is very important here. Listening for numbers, listening for times, listening for usually nouns. So here, for example, in 5, food to bring, it's usually a noun. It's very difficult to have a gap with a verb or an adjective because there's usually more than one answer, whereas a noun you can force one answer, so it's generally a noun. So simple at lower level, but at higher level, learners are having to do much more discourse construction because they're actually listening for much more information. They're having to construct it in the sentence. So here the strategy is going to be predict what kind of word you are listening for, whether that's here or here. Are you listening for a number, a name? Are you listening for a noun? If it's a noun, what kind of word could it be? Could you predict kind of? And then learners listen and try and identify the word. But again, paraphrasing, really important because they're not going to hear the information here in these notes as they do on the recording. And then we have multiple matching where they hear 5 different speakers giving a little monologue, talking about a different topic. At A2 level, they are literally matching what is each type of transport that they are talking about. So they're matching, so it's understanding gist and the main point of what the person is saying. But at higher levels, they've got 2 tasks. So C1 and C2, they're actually listening and having to answer 2 questions and do 2 matchings at the same time, or they listen twice. They do one in the first listen and they listen again and do the second task and the second listen. And here, of course, it's much more about implication. So, and it's much more about opinion, justifying opinions, listening for attitude than it is for listening for the main idea, which it is at the lower levels. So, key challenges. What do you think are the key challenges with the listening paper? So Regina said that students often just guess. And they often just guess, partly because they can't hear the words that they understand in fast speech. So this is where I think we need to really help learners with decoding. What other things do they have problems with? Yep, so lack of familiarity with words, absolutely. It's vocabulary building, isn't it, really? Cultural background, okay, yeah, the pace of the playback. There are, with multiple choice questions in these exams, quite often that they are written to help the listener. So they are written in a way where the key words, particularly in listening, where you can actually hear the key words. They're not paraphrased as much as you think they would be. The options are paraphrased a lot, but the information in the questions often aren't paraphrased very much at all. So they can listen for those words in the listening, and it will help them to get back on track. The questions are designed, and the audio scripts are designed to help learners to follow, so that can be useful. So getting them to notice that, getting them to listen on the audio script. Use of slang, okay, yeah, a lot of practice, fall in hand with the pace, okay. You're right. I mean, these are all listening problems, aren't they? We can help learners with noticing. We can get them to read and listen, read the audio script and listen, and notice the linking and notice how people pronounce it quickly. Listen to how the weak forms appear. We can do that at low level and high level. I think that's really, really useful. In terms of the actual exam strategy, you all mentioned distractors earlier on, and in all of the listening tasks, distractors are a problem. So, for example, here, this is a B1 sentence completion. And if we see it, this is all about renting a sports car. And the first sentence is, you must be more than years old to rent a car. Okay, so they're listening for an age, they're listening for a number. But if we look at the audio script, actually 3 numbers are mentioned. We've got over 20 cars available. Anyone over 25 who's passed their driving test can rent a car. There are extra charges for drivers under 30. If learners just listen for the number, they're not going to get it right. So they really have to listen for and understand how distractors work. And we can do that because there is a way that there is a way when you write these tasks, you know, it's always something like, what did he do at the weekend? Well, I thought about and someone suggested but in the end I did. And you can see how the distractors are designed to work, and we can get learners used to that. So get them to look at the audio script and recognize the role of the distractors, listen and read, and just recognize how they work. We can also get them to listen and explain why the distractors are incorrect. So without the audio script, listen and say why the wrong answers are wrong. We can give students the correct answer, and then rather than get them to guess the correct answer, maybe with the first one, with the first question, we could say, right, listen, the answer is B. Can you tell me why it's not A or C? And then they listen and they have to explain why. And then we can get students to answer multiple choice questions as well without looking at the options. So getting them to hear the answer and identify the answer before they are distracted by possible incorrect answers as well. That can sometimes work. So these are things that we can do in class to kind of train learners and help them to listen better, specifically with the test task. And then all of the things you mentioned, things like, you know, listening for weak forms and linking, being able to follow fast speech. Those are things that are just general listening skills that we can also absolutely help with. Right, I'm looking at the time and I thought I'd cut down my session, but I think I've managed to somehow make it longer. Okay, speaking. We're going to move on to speaking test then. So speaking process. They're being tested on the ability to think of what to say, pull out the grammar and vocabulary you need to say it and put it in the right order, produce the correct sounds, produce the correct stress and intonation, and then listen and respond to other people when we communicate. And we'll see that in the how they're assessed later on. So the speaking tasks are slightly different. Obviously at A2 level, they have just 2 tasks, and we'll look at that later. But across all of them, they start with an interview. And this is just the examiner interviewing 2 candidates together. They ask each one in turn some personal questions. So these are very familiar questions to the speakers. So fairly simple things at lower level, get a bit more difficult as you go up the levels, but personal questions. Then we have the long turn, and this is where candidates need to show that they can speak at length. So they have to speak for 1 minute, and this is not at A2 but at B1. At B1 they have 1 photograph and they describe what they see. So description language here is very useful and helping them to identify what they can describe. So they can, different pictures are different, but they can generally describe the place, the people, the objects, and the actions. So if they can do those things, they can fill 1 minute easily. And if they follow those topics, they can also do it in a way that actually is quite cohesive and clear. At B2 level, they have to describe 2 photographs. And here they're comparing and contrasting and speculating as well, perhaps. And then at C1 and above, they're choosing 2 or 3 photographs, and they are comparing, contrasting and speculating. But here the question is usually more abstract. It's more about the topic and theme rather than the specific images. So getting students to be able to compare and contrast using language like while, whereas, however, that kind of thing. Speculative language as well, might, perhaps, I guess, things like that. Then we've got the two-way conversation. And here, this is new for Key A2. So learners are given some picture prompts. Here there are photographs and they're given a question. So talk to your partner. Which activities do you like? Which activities do you not like? Or which do you like or not like these activities? That's probably more realistic. So that is at the lower level, and then moving up to the higher level, C1, we've got much more abstract topic to discuss. So how might the dream and the reality of doing these things differ? So becoming a princess or working as a firefighter, I think that's a lovely topic. Much more abstract, having to think of more ideas. This is much more about giving your opinions and justifying your opinion and discussing with somebody else rather than talking about likes and dislikes. And then we have the discussion, which is discussion questions, not in A2, but B1 and above, that are based on the topic of the previous task here. And they discuss, and the examiner leads the discussion. So again, much more about giving opinions and justifying opinions at the higher level. At B1, it's more about likes, dislikes, and some simple opinions and justification. So speaking task, challenges, well, obviously interaction, learners need to be able to interact, and it's sort of getting that balance, isn't it, between showing off your English but also allowing the other person to speak as well. One of the things that I know is quite common, quite popular among teachers, is giving learners phrases that they can use for interaction. So, you know, so what do you think? What do you think about that? You know, do you agree with me, or I agree, that kind of language. So putting phrases on cards, in the middle of the table, having a group around you, and when you have a conversation, when you use a phrase, you pick it up and keep it, and then whoever has the most cards at the end wins. So that's quite a nice activity. But also role-playing challenging situations where your partner speaks or doesn't speak very much, and what do you do in that situation? So giving learners the confidence to be able to actually role play that in the classroom in case it happens in exam. Scoring criteria, we have grammatical resource, lexical resource, discourse management, pronunciation, and interactive communication. And these are exactly the things that I said we do when we speak. So we're having to think of an idea and pull out the language that we need to explain that idea. Within discourse management, we need to pronounce it correctly, and we need to communicate interactively as well. Okay, moving on to writing. I'm really conscious of the time, I'm sorry. So when we write, I'm just going to go on to that one. So when we write, again, we have to think of what to say, and we have to select appropriate language, and we have to organize ideas correctly so the writer understands them. So paragraphing, punctuation, cohesive devices, and all of those might be, some of those might be slightly different in terms of different genres. So A2 level and B1 level, writing an email is the first task. Here at A2, it's just simple bullet points. At B1 level, it's now you're reading an email from an English-speaking friend, and you've written some notes in red on your email, and you need to reply, and you need to include the information in those 4 notes. So there, again, it's like having 4 bullet points, but they're written on the task. So this is new. These are new tasks for B1, and A2 is slightly different now as well. And I'll talk a bit more about that in a moment. So obviously teaching functional phrases is really important at this level, being able to help learners. It's informal at A2 and B1. So things are recommending, suggesting, inviting, those are the typical things, thanking, for example. So we can teach phrases. Now, writing an email, it also appears as an optional, as one of the options you can choose at B2 and above, and these can be formal or informal or semi-formal, so helping learners to identify the right phrase for the different formality is really important as well for the different audience. And we can get students writing emails to each other and responding to make it more authentic. So invite get your learners to invite each other to a weekend event, for example, and then they could write and politely say no, for example. Write them, thank them for an imaginary gift they've sent or something like that. It can be really nice because then they write to each other. It's rather nice. At B2 and above, they have to write an essay. So they're given quite a lot of information, but it's more of an academic essay. And whereas at obviously the word count is different at different levels. So it increases as they go up through the levels there. Now at A2, they now also write a story based on pictures. At B1, they also write a story based on, they're given a first line. And at the higher levels, they have different options, so they can choose as their second task from, it could be an article, a report, a review, a proposal, or an email, as I said. So they're going to have to think about, we need to help them to understand how to lay out those different genres, how to write to a different audience, the style is obviously important here, and how to what to put into your paragraphs and so on. And the scoring criteria is based on content, communicative achievement, organisation and language. So again, thinking what to say, how to say it, how to organise it, and the language that you use. And that is what learners are assessed on. Okay, then changes to the exams. We've seen some of them. So for those of you that teach A2, key for schools, as I say, the exam is changing in 2020. So in the reading and the writing, the ones in yellow are new. So we now have the multiple choice short text. This is the short message or notice or sign where they choose the correct main idea. We saw it with the children go free into the building. I think it was some kind of historical building. So that's that particular task. And then in terms of writing, we have the short story based on the pictures which we just saw, and that's 35 words or more. A couple of changes in the multiple matching task, where learners have the information about 3 people and they match which writer did this, which writer did that. That now has 3 texts. And in terms of the short message that learners write, it's now 25 words or over. Before, it had a minimum and a maximum. They've taken the maximum away so that learners who are strong can excel and show that they are strong and write more if necessary. The short story is 35 words or more. And that's 60 minutes. So overall, actually, the key exam has reduced by 10 minutes from 1 hour 50 to 1 hour 40. So this is 6 minutes. The listening is 30 minutes. And there's one additional task, and this is the 5 short extracts where they hear 5 short conversations and they answer a multiple choice question about each one. The others are the same. In the speaking exam, it's 8 to 10 minutes. They have the introductory interview with the questions about themselves, and then they have the collaborative task which we saw, which was the pictures. Do you like or not like these activities? So a task like that. And the examiner will lead the discussions. The examiner will help to allow the learners, more opportunity to speak if the conversation dries up. So they will help them with further questions. In terms of B1, I should say also this, the grading has changed actually for A2 and B1 as well. So it used to be pass with distinction, and that's now an A. Pass with merit is now a B, and a pass is now a C. So that has changed as well. Okay, for B1 preliminary, so the reading is and use of English are 45 minutes. There are 2 new texts here. There's the gapped text, where there are missing sentences that they have to insert back in. And there's the open gap fill, where they have, or the open close, where there are some gaps and they have to write the word which is missing without options. So that's the reading. Then we have the writing, where it's 45 minutes and they now write an email of 100 words, not a message, and there are no more transformations. So they write an email, and then the second task, before it was writing a letter or a story, and now it's an article or a story, and again it's about 100 words. So they write an email and then they have the choice of an article or a story. The listening is 30 minutes, and again, just as with Key, the new task is that they have multiple choice short texts, so 6 short texts, and they have to answer a multiple choice question about each one. And at this level, they're being tested not just on factual information, but also attitudes and opinions. And there are 3 options, not 4. And then in the speaking, it's exactly the same. It's just that 2 and 3 have changed positions. So you have the interview, you have the long turn, the collaborative task, and the discussion is linked to the collaborative task. It was the 2 tasks in the middle were the other way around before. Okay, so I think it's time for questions, and I'm really sorry, I should have left 10 minutes, I've only left 5. So do you want to type your questions? Where could I get the grading criteria for speaking or writing? Okay, Jose, there are handbooks. There are handbooks for each of these exams that you can search for online. If you Google them, so if you Google B1 First Handbook, you can find the handbook. Now, for the new exams for 2020, the A2 Key and Key for Schools, they are out now. I saw this morning that they are online. The B1 is coming soon, so preliminary is coming soon. But if you go to those handbooks, then you can actually look for the criteria, and it goes into much more detail about each of the descriptors that I mentioned, so that you can actually identify those and help learners to identify them as well. Okay, so grading criteria, thank you. What do you mean by weak forms when listening? So weak forms, so for example, were is a strong form and were is the weak form, because when we speak, we don't say we were working all day yesterday. We don't say we were working all day yesterday. We say we were working all day yesterday. So obviously this were, learners need to understand that this were has a meaning, and they need to match that sound to the word that they know when they write, because otherwise they can't do the lexical matching. They can't do the lexical search and match. It makes it more difficult. Where can I find more classroom activities for B1? Well, obviously, if you have a good course book, then you should be able to have lots of classroom activity ideas in the teacher's book, in the book itself, and also the teacher's book, and there should be photocopiable activities as well there. So the examples I showed you today were from the Gold series or Gold Experience, which is for secondary. But we're going to be looking, as I say, over the course of the next set of webinars, and we're going to be looking at much more practical ideas for the classroom than we have done today. Today was more about understanding the exam. So you should get more ideas, so please do come back, I think, if that's okay. No problem, thank you for your thanks. So just if there are any more questions, please do type, but for now, just to let you know then that I will be here next week, same time, same place. Yes, same place. I'm moving house, but I won't have moved yet. And the topic is on balancing your teaching. And by that, we mean the challenge of 2 things, really. Firstly, sometimes we have a class of learners where some learners want to take the exam and some learners don't. So how do we balance our teaching to meet the needs of all of those learners? And secondly, it's very easy when we're teaching an exam to forget why we're teaching English in the first place, and it's to communicate in the real world. So how do we balance helping students to achieve the exam score that they need with also helping them to develop their skills for the real world? So that's the topic for next week. So it's going to be much more practical about lesson staging and lesson techniques and lesson activity and ideas. So I really hope you can all come. Thank you very much for coming today, and I think hopefully I can't see any more questions, so thank you very much and look forward to seeing you then. Have a great day, everyone. Bye-bye.